Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another recommendations video for the June month-long readathon Reading Women. A mouthful. If you don't know what I'm talking about, first of all, you will find all the links and all the information down below in the description box as always. But for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, Kendra Winchester, who has a wonderful booktube channel, she's also doing a podcast together with a friend of hers, Autumn Privet, the Reading Women podcast, and they promote books by or about women, and they always have a year-long challenge with 24 prompts, and in June they are celebrating their anniversary, their birthday, their second birthday. Happy birthday, Reading Women podcast. And in order to celebrate that, Kendra decided to organize a month-long readathon, the Reading Women Readathon. And in this month, people who participate try to do, some of the challenges of the 24 challenges. It's not the idea to do all these challenges now in June, but the idea is to have June as a, promotion to read even more books by or about women. There's a playlist you will find down below where you can find recommendations for certain challenges or people who filmed their TBRs for the months. There's also a Goodreads group where you can find, suggestions for certain prompts, but also the other booktubers like me, we do recommendation videos for certain challenges. And this one, very long introduction, and this one is challenge number 12 or prompt number 12, a book about true crime. So that's what I want to do today, and I have again a mix. I did already a video about a book, challenge number 11. That's a book about a person with a chronic or physical illness. And this time I'll do a similar mix, 6 books. I have 2 memoirs for you, 2 non-fiction books dealing with famous trial, and 2 novels. So first up are the 2 memoirs, and the first of those is Sara Perry, After the Eclipse, published last year, 2017. Now, Sara Perry is an American author, and she's not the Sara Perry you might know or have read a book, the Essex Serpent. So it's the same name, but a different Sara. Anyway, After the Eclipse is the memoir of her mother's murder, Crystal. Her mother, Crystal, was murdered in a small village in rural Maine when Sara Perry was 12 years old, in their home. And Sarah was at home when it happened. She was in her bedroom upstairs. She didn't see the man who killed her mother, but she was present. So the perpetrator, the murderer, fled the scene and was not caught for more than a decade. The book, first of all, tells us about that time then when the police started their investigation. It's very harrowing to read, especially how Sarah, as a potential witness, was treated, because the police thought she might be lying and she might have seen the murderer, that it was the boyfriend or one of the ex-boyfriends of her mother, and she didn't want to tell. So that part is really very, very heartbreaking to read. But the memoir also tells us about the family situation, about Crystal, her mother, how she grew up, the family of Sara Perry's grandmother, and then, of course, also once the murderer was indeed found, and it was not it was not her boyfriend, Crystal's boyfriend or an ex-boyfriend, the trial and how that. What that meant for Sarah and what a trial can do, and especially what it can't do. So if you're interested in true crime memoirs and in this very personal account of the murder of the mother of the author, then I can certainly recommend Sara Perry's After the Eclipse. Oh, and by the way, the title, The Murder Happened 2 days after a solar eclipse. That's why after the eclipse. The second memoir is by an author you probably have heard of, and that is Maggie Nelson's The Red Parts, published in 2007. Now, like I said, Maggie Nelson, you might have heard about her. She's an American poet and novelist, writer, nonfiction. The Argonauts, published I think 2 years ago, was one of her latest works, which had a lot of acclaim and was discussed widely on BookTube. Bluets also. But this one, The Red Parts, is about a young woman, Jane Mixer, who in 1969 wants to go home from Michigan Law School, where she studies law, to tell her parents that she's getting married. And she is found shot and strangled a day later after she left law school in a small cemetery. Now, there have been more murders like that in the area around the same time, and they are all supposed to be by one killer, a serial killer, who is then caught and convicted of some of the crimes, but not of Jane Mixer's murder. Now, Jane Mixer is Maggie Nelson's aunt, and the memoir, The Red Parts, deals with the fact that Maggie Nelson grew up with her aunt being murdered, uncertain whether the guy who was in prison and was convicted did actually kill her aunt. So it might also be that her aunt's murder was still out there. So Maggie Nelson deals with that, with her childhood. She tells her about her childhood. In the memoir is much less a matter-of-fact account than the previous memoir I mentioned. It's in the typical Maggie Nelson style, very poetic, with little snippets about her childhood, but also gives us the facts about the reopening of her aunt's case, how she, as the niece of the murdered woman, got interested in the case and what happened then. I'm not going to tell you, of course, because it will spoil you. But it's a very, very poetically written, well-researched true crime memoir of a special kind. So if you're looking for something in the memoir genre about a true crime, but want something different, then I can certainly recommend Maggie Nelson's The Red Parts. And then we move on to non-memoir, non-fiction. And the first of my two recommendations is Helen Garner's The House of Grief, published in 2014. Helen Garner, you may also probably know. She is a novelist, non-fiction writer, Australian writer, born in 1942. And The House of Grief is about a murder case in Australia happening in 2005, where a father, Robert, drives with his three young children, three sons, in the car, and he drives the car off the road into the water. He saves himself, but his three sons drown. Now, he is then tried for murder. He claims that he is innocent, that it was an accident, that he didn't plan on killing the boys or driving off the road, that it happened by accident. And Helen Garner, who has no relation, with the accused, sits as a spectator and tells us about the trial. And she does research, of course, so you also given background information about the case, about Robert's family, about his estranged wife, what the motive could have been. And if you Google the case, it's not a spoiler if I tell you that Robert was indeed convicted. But the book focuses on the trial and how the trial worked, and what Helen, as a non-lawyer, thought of the questioning, for instance, or the two lawyers, the district attorney and the defense lawyer. So this is a book, if you're interested in reading about a murder trial from the perspective of a journalist, so to speak. I found, because I'm a lawyer, I had issues with the book but it's uninteresting. For non-lawyers, this is a very good pick if you want to read a journalistic account of a trial with some background information about the families, victim and accused, and giving background also of how the trial worked and how people acted throughout the trial. My second recommendation for the non-memoir, non-fiction true crime book is one of the most famous books on a true crime, on one of the most famous crimes, at least in modern history, and that is, of course, Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem on the banality of evil, first published in 1963. Now, if you're not, this is a very battered, by the way, Penguin Classic Edition, because not only have I read the book many, many times, but I also used this in class when I was still teaching law. Hannah Arendt, for those of you who might not familiar, is a philosopher, political thinker. She died in 1975. She was born in Germany into a Jewish family, and she fled Germany in 1933. She first lived in France, and then beginning of the 1940s, she moved to the United States, and she has lived there until her death. In 1960, after Adolf Eichmann, who I don't think needs any further introduction, quote unquote, he was arrested in South America, or better kidnapped by the Israeli Secret Service in 1960, and then put on trial in Jerusalem. And in 1962, he was sentenced to death and executed. He was hanged, he was cremated, and his ashes were scattered into the Mediterranean Sea. And Hannah Arendt, at that time, in the beginning of the 60s, when the trial was happening, was already, as I said, living in the US. She worked also as a journalist, apart from writing tomes of books. If you are interested in modern philosophy, especially political philosophy, you should check out her work. But she was sent by the New Yorker to Jerusalem to be a spectator of the trial. So the book first appeared in pieces in 1963 in the New Yorker. Those were the times where you could take a year to write pieces for a magazine. And it caused an uproar because Hannah Arendt, like the subtitle suggests, not only looks at the trial and tells us what happens, but she reflects also on what justice means and whether Adolf Eichmann is actually evil. And she comes to the conclusion that he is not evil in the sense of a monster, but that his evilness is banal. She is flabbergasted by the banality of this person who was responsible for so many deaths, because he was responsible for sending Jews to the gas chamber, to the concentration camps. So you learn how the trial proceeded, like in the previous book I mentioned, Helen Garner's book, but it's also a philosophical reflection on justice, on international trials, and on evil. What does it mean? So you can imagine that Hannah Arendt she received death threats. The Jewish community was in uproar because of this book, because she pictured Adolf Eichmann as an uninteresting, banal personality and not as a monster. But anyway, so this book might not be for everyone because it's very dense, it's very philosophical, but I think it's a must-read if you're interested in modern 20th century history. So I couldn't do a recommendation video for true crime without mentioning Hannah Arendt's book. And then, as I said, the last two books will be two novels. The first one is Sara Schmidt, See What I Have Done, published last year. It's Sara Schmidt, she's an Australian author. It's her debut novel, and the novel fictionalizes a true crime, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't mention it, and that is the Lizzie Borden case from 1892, where Lizzie Borden, a young woman, was accused of having killed her father and stepmother with an axe, quite brutally. She was put on trial and she was acquitted, mainly, if you can trust what you can read about it now, because people couldn't picture that a woman could commit a crime like that. But there was always doubt whether she did it or not. And Sara Schmidt opens her book with the murder, that it's told partly from Lizzie's perspective and partly from a maid's perspective. And I'm not going to tell you whether, Lizzie did it in the book or not. You have to read it for herself, but um, it's trying to give various perspectives and taking into account that we don't really know what happened. So Sara Schmidt, obviously, in a fictionalized account, she tries to reinvent those murders. I think it's definitely a book worthwhile checking out if you want to read true crime for this challenge or for whatever reason, but you want to read a novel, then I think the Lizzie Borden case and Sara Schmidt's book would be a really good pick. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering, there's a Netflix series, I think from 2 years ago, or yeah, 2015, I think, about the Lizzie Borden. It's called the Lizzie Borden case or something. I'll leave a link down below. But this Netflix series is not actually about the murder. It's set after the acquittal. So it's, you know, dealing with Lizzie Borden's life after she was acquitted. She lived for more than 3 decades after the acquittal. So anyway, just in case you were wondering. But check out the true crime novel, Sara Schmidt, See What I Have Done. And the last book, because this video has been going on way too long, I'm sorry about that. You know that I'm always waffling. But anyway, the last book is one of my favorite novels about a true crime, and that's Joyce Meinert's book, To Die For, first published in 1992. Joyce Meinert is an American journalist, writer, novelist. You might have heard of her. And To Die For, although she changed all the names, is based on the Pamela Smart case, which happened in 1990, where Pamela Smart, a young woman working at a high school, was convicted of the murder of her husband. And it was claimed that she had an affair with one of her students, 15-year-old Billy Flynn. That part she acknowledged, and that she then convinced Flynn that he should murder her husband because otherwise she would stop the relationship. Now, Pamela Smart was convicted of conspiring to murder, and she's serving a life sentence currently, but she always claimed that she didn't ask her young lover to kill her husband, but that her lover did that on his own account. But obviously, not only the prosecution, but also the jury believed the account of the young lover and his accomplices, that he was, forced, quote unquote, to kill Pamela Smart's husband by Pamela herself, because she didn't want to have a divorce, but she wanted to collect the life insurance. Anyway, but I think even though, like I said, Joyce Meinert changed the names, this is a fantastic book looking into, the personality of Pamela Smart, trying to figure out her personality, but also the obsession that her young lover had with her, the sexual obsession. So if you want to read a really gritty novel about a true crime, then I would highly recommend To Die For. Anyway, this was it. A much too long video. I'm sorry about that. For prompt number 12, True Crime, for the Reading Women Readathon. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know whether you participate in the Readathon in June, or whether you're planning on reading any of the true crime novels that I suggested, or books that I suggested, or whether you have any recommendations for this prompt. And I'll see you all soon in my next, much shorter video. Bye-bye.